Holding people's stories is such a sacred job, I would say. And that's a lot of what the jobs are that I've done, is holding people's stories. And I don't think I realized how much I was internalizing those stories and how much they were affecting me. I was working late probably every single night. And, here I was, this 19-year-old feeling really responsible for what's happening to the people that I'm working with and their lives. And I think inflating my sense of importance almost, right? Without knowing I was doing that. And I remember a coworker came in because he was working late too. And he was like, "Amanda, nobody is going to die because you are not sitting in this desk right now." That was for me the first moment where I realized boundaries were super important.
This is Mind the Ceiling, a show about trailblazing women who are shattering barriers. These are the candid conversations that dig into what the journey to finding purpose and climbing to the top of industries is like. All of the victories, hurdles, bumps and bruises, and celebrations along the way, and the tools you can use to be the next ceiling breaker. I'm your host, Tamara Lane. My guest today is Amanda Koonjbeharry, Director of Public Policy at Citizens League, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that's been using civic engagement to make Minnesota a better place to live for almost 70 years. Now, through Citizens League, Amanda has balanced community relationships and policy on highly polarized topics such as policing. And Amanda's track record for civic engagement and civic action shows her commitment to her community every day. Amanda formerly was the director of No Wrong Door, the anti-sex trafficking committee, where she helped combat the exploitation of children during the 52nd Super Bowl. Before that, she received her master's in social work and master's in public policy. And this is how she describes her journey to finding purpose.
Yeah, it's evolving and it looks different for me as I am evolving as a human.
And what has that purpose evolved to now?
Tamara, coming out with the big questions on a Tuesday afternoon. I love it. I would say my purpose is still being defined. I think one thing I've learned over the years is it continues to evolve for me, depending on the season and kind of where I'm at in life. But I think the main thread that I've noticed for myself is that it's really about love and joy. So creating that, spreading that.
Love and joy. How exactly does Amanda usher that into the communities that she belongs to?
So I work for an organization called Citizens League. We are a smaller nonprofit based here in Minnesota. So we do public policy work for the state. And my role is the director of public policy. So I oversee many of the different policy projects that are coming into us in coordination with my executive director. And happy to dive into topics because I know that's so broad and it can mean so many different things. So happy to chat about what that actually looks like on the ground in practice. Yeah,
because not only from what does it look like in a daily grind, but what does that mean exactly when you're developing policy or trying to implement policy? What does that mean?
Absolutely. I think the unique thing about my work and the thing that I love about my work too and our organization is when you talk about public policy, I think a lot of folks think about you're at the Capitol, you're at the state legislature, right? You're lobbying for things and you're kind of putting in that grind with elected officials. And that can be part of our work. I'm not a registered lobbyist yet, but the way that we do public policy is, let's say we're working with a state department and they are contracting us to go out and do community engagement. And we really are focused on how do we make sure that we are capturing the experiences and co-creating solutions with people most impacted by these issues. And then handing that forward so that the actual truth of what people are saying is really captured in that and is in the essence of any policies or processes that are going to be built out next. So that's kind of what we do.
And so can you give me an example of something that you're working on that you're really excited about?
Totally. It's actually really good timing. So this couldn't have worked out better, but we are actually wrapping up a very big project that we did and are finishing with the city of St. Paul. So the commissioner or the mayor over there, Mayor Carter, hired us to convene a 48-member commission. And that group was charged with a couple of different things, really looking at public safety and what are some alternative response models to certain call types that come into 911. And we are presenting the report, some of the recommendations that came out of that work tomorrow, actually, to the city council. So that will be released on Friday. Yeah, so coming really soon here. So again, today, perfect timing to have this conversation. But with that group, it really was bringing together so many different people from different perspectives. We are a nonpartisan organization, so that's a huge part of how we convene people too, is really bringing folks with different perspectives, ideologies, lived experiences to talk about these issues that are impacting them and really think about how do we come up with a solution and a recommendation that people can agree on or find majority support of. So that's what we did with this.
That's so exciting because if people don't know, the 911 calls and how you respond to that could be anything from, does a police officer respond to a domestic dispute with someone who may have mental illness, or should it be a social worker, right? Like these are
exactly,
I don't know if that's exactly, but those are the types of issues, and it's a really big deal and it impacts lives.
Absolutely. And those were actually two of the conversations that we actually had. So it's almost as if you were there, Tamara, because that's literally what we talked about too. So yeah, it's incredible work.
Well, and so, but if we got, kind of down into the nitty gritty of it, what would you say you do on a daily basis? Like, what is the main thing that you do that people might not expect?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a ton of my work, kind of informally, formally, is really kind of nurturing and building relationships. And I think I say that because I don't think that, especially when you're starting out in a career and you're thinking about policy and what that means, again, oftentimes people think it's really these hardcore policy wonks, you're in policy briefs, you're only focused on bills that are going through, state or federal government. And that's kind of where your head is. And a lot of the time, it really is about relationships for me. How do I build them? How do I maintain them? And how do I nurture them? Because it is our relationships that really bring the projects to us also. And then the people, the amazing people that we then work with and co-create with and collaborate with, it really is through that fostering of those connections.
You may have never guessed that relationship building played such a key role in the job of a policy director. That just goes to show you how critical our soft skills are to our careers. But before we dive into Amanda's career, let's go back in time to the very beginning when Amanda's journey was first starting.
My experience of my high school was somewhat traumatic in many ways, for lack of a better term. I grew up in Prior Lake. I lived in Savage. We were kind of on the border of where my high school was and a few other cities. And the city where I went to school are not very diverse. And so I'm not sure how familiar folks are with the Minnesota landscape, but when you're in the Twin City metro area, so Minneapolis, St. Paul, you have most of your racial and ethnic diversity kind of concentrated in those two cities in Minnesota. And then you start getting out into first and second ring suburbs. It's still pretty diverse, but then greater Minnesota, not so much, right? And even though Prior Lake, where I grew up and went to school, is not far out from the cities, I definitely think it was kind of its own microorganism in the sense of beliefs that people had, or just not leaving the area and things like that. And a lot of the kids that I grew up with in older grades and some in my grade too, there was really explicit racism that occurred at the school. And for me, and I've talked about this before, where it really was the epitome of like institutional racism that was allowed. I mean, kids would have Confederate flags on their shirts and hats and on their tailgates in the parking lots of their vehicles, right? It was so absurd to me that was the environment. And then I would hear racial slurs at other people. There was bullying that happened. I experienced some of that too, and then witnessing a lot of it. So for me, it was really this, being in an environment where I didn't feel welcomed. I didn't feel accepted, right? Really, it was just such a very impactful experience for me. And really is what makes me so passionate about social justice and racial justice in particular, and really kind of calling out, you know, racism and institutional and systemic issues that we still find to this day.
This makes me now want to ask 20 questions. So I'm going to try and bring it to just a few, but so that people understand, because in my head, I think like, this wasn't that long ago, right? And you think that we're getting better and better and better, but it's not. Can you explain what's like an example of something that you went through and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, definitely. One example, and I think this is so true of Minnesota in particular. I think, in other parts of the country, you may experience racism in a much more explicit way. And I think the Midwest, you look at any study and the data and the statistics, we have some of the worst racial disparities when it comes to home ownership of Black residents, education, healthcare outcomes, economic outcomes that we're looking at. Like undeniably, we have some of the worst in the country. And I think the most insidious thing about the Midwest, about Minnesota in particular, is that it's not the overt racism that you may find in other parts of the nation. It really is the microaggressions that you experience. And so I've experienced that. I mean, it's just almost kind of normal to some extent when you live here. Like it's just happening all the time in really weird, implicit ways. And so in high school, though, a prime example of one of the situations I experienced, I would be sitting at lunch with a couple of other, friends of mine, and the school didn't have a lot of racial and ethnic diversity of students. So naturally, I think folks of color, students, Black and brown and other students of color, we kind of gravitated towards each other because of that commonality of that experience and identity. And so our group was pretty diverse, I would say. And there was always this one older kid that would come over and sit on our table, and he would just pick on us and just sit there as if he owned the table. And he was white, and most of us are people of color, and he's kind of kicking us out of that spot. And there are so many other open seats, right? But it really is this notion of trying to tell us, I think, that we don't belong here. And for me, I just got tired of it. And a few of my friends and we ended up going to a local community college because the environment, me personally, I was just, again, I was tired of it. I was over it. And going to that community college, it was a 180 for me. It really was a culture shock in many ways, because that was the first time where I felt like I belonged in an environment. And even though I saw Guyanese people and people of my own identity, outside of school and on the weekends, my family, whoever, but having to go to a school where you don't feel like you belong, you rarely are seeing any other West Indian or Guyanese person. You have to find people that you resonate with, and there are few and far in between. Like it really does something to your psyche, I would say.
And I just, again, I'm just amazed when hearing you talk about it. But what I love is the resiliency and like finding a path. If you look back, what do you wish you would have known or could tell yourself?
Yeah, I love this question. And what I would have told myself is so simple yet so profound, right? That I am enough, I am worthy, and most importantly, that I belonged there, that I belong there. And I think for the folks that your audience, folks who are going to be watching this, especially young women of color, I hope that they know that, because I didn't know that. And as a young person growing up, I think we don't talk about this enough. Just as a young girl, racism, it not just deteriorates your self-worth as a human. I think as a young girl in our society of what is accepted, what does beauty mean, who is desired, who's loved, all those things, right? And we all are so conditioned, and we see messages all over. And when you don't see yourself in those images or in those messages, again, it does something to your psyche and it does something to your self-worth. And so I want young girls to know, and what I would have told myself is like, you are so freaking amazing. You are so beautiful. You are so worthy. And the folks that are not for you, that's okay. You're going to find a million other people that are, and they are worth your time. So I would say all of those things. I know you just asked me for one, but I just can't, I couldn't just stop at one.
No, I love it. And I'm curious, did you have a moment, like an aha moment, when all of a sudden you realize like, oh my gosh, I am really good at this, and I am special, and I can accomplish great things?
I think I continue to surprise myself. And I mean, that may sound weird, but I think, you asked me for that one word, and I said evolving. And I think that's why I continue to be surprised by myself too, is that not that I don't have high expectations or high beliefs in what I can do, but I think it's just been so cool to be able to look back and reflect on different moments and different achievements, and then just in life and see, wow, I am doing this. It's not that I'm waiting to do it, but I'm doing it right now. And that just for me is just it's just amazing. It's a beautiful feeling. And it reminds me that like I'm here and I can do this. And I have everything I need to be able to do that and to succeed.
And I'm curious, did kind of the challenges you were facing and the racism that you were experiencing in high school, did that affect your how you were doing in your schoolwork or what you were trying to accomplish?
For me, it didn't. I think, you talked about resiliency. And when I think about, folks I've worked with too, who've experienced a lot of trauma in many different ways, and myself included, I think as people, resiliency shows up in different ways. And resiliency for me really was in achieving and showing myself that I can do these things. And I wasn't going to let anybody define what my ceiling was, really. And so I keep continuing to challenge that for me. So yeah, that's what I would say is that, yeah.
And so your high school experience really shaped where you were going to go with your career. Did you jump right into college knowing what you were going to do, or were you still kind of testing things out?
Yeah, I love that. So I kind of always knew, I knew at a young age because of certain things that I experienced in life, that there was this like burning flame to serve people and to serve my community. As corny as it might sound, like I really did feel that way. And again, a lot of the cultural conditioning was in the back of my mind. And so it wasn't like right away that I'm this badass person, I'm going to go and pursue this family social science or social work. I did have to go through a process where I explored other things. I think I was trying to convince myself that no, you need to be a doctor, go into like some kind of medical field, even if it's whatever. And so I ended up shadowing like a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a dentist. Like I literally was exploring all of the medical field, and none of it was resonating. I was super bored, and no offense to people that do that work. It is amazing. We need you, but it wasn't for me. And I eventually, then I decided, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do.
But making the decision to choose social work wasn't an easy one. I'll let her explain it more.
So I ended up studying family social science. And the reason why it was such a barrier breaking, ceiling breaking moment for me was that in my community and in my culture, and so I identify as Indo-Caribbean, my family's from Guyana, South America, and in kind of the Indian, West Indian community, as far as my experience, a lot of times you are not, kind of encouraged to pursue fields like social work or family social science. People don't even know what that is, to be quite frank. And you're really directed to be kind of a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. Again, these professions that folks see as worthy, as, reputable, that kind of thing. And when I decided that I wanted to pursue, more of the social work kind of field, I didn't get that kind of support that I think I needed during that time, right? And I remember facing a lot of, not backlash, but I think folks were a little confused and didn't understand, again, weren't super supportive, and were kind of doubtful about what I was actually going to be able to do in that line of work and how lucrative that would actually be. And so for me, just like the sheer fact of deciding that I'm going to do this and it's something that I'm passionate about, I love this work and I want to serve my community, that was a barrier breaking moment in and of itself, and creating pathways for other people to be able to do that too.
That's amazing. And how did you process that? Because, so many times if there's pressure from outside, you go, okay, maybe I need to change my course or I'm not going to do it. But you pursued, you went forward. How did you process that? And, why did you decide to keep going?
I think I was so used to being kind of this barrier breaker, just even in my community, right? Even in my nuclear family of my parents and my brother, and then my sister, where I don't think you could call me the black sheep per se, because I think my parents are pretty proud of me. Hopefully, if they listen to this, they would say that. But I didn't stay within that box of how a woman in my community is supposed to kind of be, in the box that she's supposed to stay in. And, I moved out, I did different things that kind of went against that. So for me during that time, this was so important to me because of the adversities that I went through in my life. I really didn't want to see other people experience suffering in the ways that I did through certain experiences that I had. And that really was the driving force for me wanting to do this work, wanting to serve people in that capacity. And it really still sustains me and fuels me in wanting to stay in this work. Because there are moments, I won't lie, where I'm like, the corporate sector sounds very intriguing, or other sectors where you may make more money, but my heart is so tied here because of those things and I don't want other people to have those experiences if they don't have to, right? And so that's kind of what drove me. And then proving people wrong too, honestly, and and myself that, I can be successful in this line of work. And I don't want to be afraid of the unknown. I kind of just wanted to go for it.
So she followed her heart in college, even with the pushback she received. But she found herself headed in the right direction.
I think the experience piece is so important, like you're saying. And it really, maybe I didn't know right away what I wanted to do. I didn't know what that looked like. And I think throughout my career, I didn't know what that next thing was. So that openness to try things was super important to me, and actually continues to be important for me. And there have been jobs where if I wasn't open to that, I never would have been doing that kind of work, because I never could have imagined that for myself. But the opportunities just kind of opened themselves up.
Well, and so is there something in college that you learned that you've taken with you and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I picked that up?
Great question. I would say in college, during grad school, definitely so many actual technical skills that I learned, right, that I do apply now. So it was worth the money to do that for me, but for the most part. And in undergrad, in undergrad, I would say one thing, and again, it's somewhat technical, but I bring this up because I've recently I supervise interns that come into our organization who are in their undergrad programs. And one thing that one of them ended up asking me about was networking, because nobody did a class on that. Nobody's talking about it with them apparently. And as far as I know, and they asked, what does that actually mean? And then how do you do it? And I think for me during undergrad and throughout my career, that has been such an important skill that I learned in school. There were many opportunities for me to actually be able to practice that I was able to take advantage of. And again, it wasn't about that technical thing that I was learning that was specific to my major or, my master's at the time, but it really was about how do I build relationships with people? And again, going back to what I said earlier, that has been one of the most important skills that I've been able to have. And that's actually been able to get me to these different amazing opportunities and work that I've been able to do.
It's an amazing, and I mean, I love that you brought it up because I can't say it enough. Networking and nurturing relationships, it really is something that will help you in every aspect of your life and career. And I think that I learned it way too late. Or not way too late, because obviously I am doing it now, but like you're never too late to learn it. But like, I wish I would have honed in on that earlier. And you're right. There's no class, on that. Well, so
we should start one on that.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
Amanda is completely right. Networking is such a tough skill to crack, but it only gets better with more practice and guidance. And if you're looking to find out tips, we are actually launching some amazing resources on our website, so stay tuned. But for now, let's go back to Amanda's journey. So after you graduated, did you go straight into graduate school or did you explore other opportunities?
Yes, thank you. And I think that was the question we were on that I blanked. So after undergrad, I ended up doing what I wanted to pursue in undergrad. So I then knew the next step for me was a master's degree in social work. I did actually take a year off, and I think there's a ton of debate from people, do you take a year off? Do you not? And again, advanced degrees aren't for everybody, and college isn't for everybody either. That is not the only path that you can or should take, right? It really depends on what works. But I took a year off. I worked, I've done so many random jobs too. I think I was working at a dealership at the time and then doing all kinds of other things. So it's been fun to do those different things. But during that time though, I wasn't 100% off. So I was taking some prep courses. I was still getting ready to go into grad school. And then I ended up having a couple of different jobs in between then. And then while I started grad school. So for me, it was helpful actually to have that time though, to really take a break, quite frankly, and not be in school, and to then really focus on my work experience too. And that was super helpful as I then entered into grad school, and I could apply what I was doing in work into theories I was learning about in the classroom.
And so why did you decide to go to, let me start that again. Why did you decide to go to grad school versus just diving into social work?
Yeah, for me, because I did family social science, it wasn't a bachelor's in social work. And for me, when you think about the career path of a social worker, I thought I was going to go a clinical route. And to do a clinical route, you have to go to grad school. You have to get your licensure. You have to do certain things to fulfill state requirements that you have to maintain that license. And so that is why I ended up going into social work. And then during my MSW, my master's in social work program, I ended up doing a second master's in public policy.
Amanda didn't wait to start working. With a year off before grad school and even during grad school, she found herself at different jobs, which would end up shifting her career path.
I was working at a job at a place called Resource Incorporated. They are now called Avivo, and they provide a whole kind of slew of different services for folks. mental health services, chemical dependency resources. And the arm that I worked for was related to Minnesota's welfare program called MFIP. And I worked with children and families, and I had what they call a very diverse caseload. So I worked with families who were possibly experiencing domestic violence, families who were experiencing homelessness. So I had a few families that lost their housing during the time we worked together, had to go through, this whole process of getting into shelter and transitional housing. And in that time, I just got really frustrated with what I was seeing, quite frankly, and in terms of how systems were operating and how unsupportive those systems were to the families I was working with. And, we would have resources, 1 week, and then a week later, things might be taken away because, there were cuts to budgets and things like that. So for me, that actually changed my trajectory too. I decided I didn't want to do clinical practice. I was really interested in the macro level systems work and changing policies to impact people's lives in a different way. And there were two things that really led me down that path. I had a chance to testify on a bill that was going through our state legislature, and seeing that process was just super invigorating. And then I worked with a woman who was in a really abusive situation, and she had left her husband and ended up benefiting from a bill that was passed here in Minnesota that allowed her to get an order for protection for a much longer time period. And I actually had that legislator who co-authored that bill in class. And so to see it kind of come around full circle was just so powerful to me as this young person. And I was just like, I want to be able to advocate here at the systems level so that people's lives are impacted better and that policies are actually crafted to have positive impacts on people's lives.
It's incredible to see how one woman could change the course of another woman's life through a piece of legislation. But this was just one of the many cases impacted by policy. And that was it. Amanda realized her calling was geared towards influencing policy and communities.
So I used to work at Hennepin County, which is the county that Minneapolis is in. Most people know Minneapolis and that city. So I worked for Hennepin County, and prior to doing that work, I was doing all different kinds of planning work and working in like the human services side of things. And then the person that had been running the what is called No Wrong Door program at Hennepin County, which is the anti-sex trafficking program, he ended up retiring. Him and I had worked together quite a bit on that work in the role that I had been in previously. And so I applied, and it ended up working out. And so I assumed this role, and it really was to implement this pretty large plan that the county board, administration, and other folks designed I would say 2 years before I assumed the role. And I mean, it was, again, as a young person, this was a really profound moment for me in my career too. And coming in and not having had, taken on such a macro level issue, right? And such an egregious issue at the same time. And I had, worked with folks who had been in the commercial sex industry to some capacity in other roles. So coming to this work, it was really kind of full circle again in that way. And this program was really focused on young people and children, so under the age of 18. And I think what really propelled the work that we did was when Super Bowl came in to Minneapolis, and I ended up advocating for Hennepin County to be at the center of some of that because it was happening literally in our backyard. The stadium is kind of right next to where the county building is. And, we had this plan in place. It was really a prime moment for us to really get the money and support that we needed to amp up the work that we were doing, provide the necessary services that young people were saying that they needed and wanted, and really try to do some of that preventative work too. So again, hugely impactful to me personally, and professionally. And the Super Bowl work was just an amazing feat to be a part of and to witness. And I have to shout out really the outreach workers and the community-based organizations here in the Twin City area, and the folks who came in from different areas too. But they did just such a phenomenal job of being on the ground and really supporting people where they were in that moment during that time frame. And they continue to do that to this day.
Well, but all I can think about is what a huge responsibility that was, and stepping into that, especially as like a young woman, you're still in graduate school, right?
I had
At the
just
time?
finished.
Oh, you
Yeah,
just
I had
so
just kind
you
of finished not long ago. Yeah.
And so how did you get in the mindset of like leading such an incredible project?
I remember I was scared. I mean, and I'll totally admit that. Like, I was terrified of failing. And not just because, so I think I was terrified of failing because it wasn't just me who would fail. I'm failing the people that were there to serve, right, with this project, which are children and young people and other folks who are experiencing that. But for me as a brown woman, it's not just when I fail at that level. Like, I was probably one of the youngest people in that kind of role, right? I was reporting to senior level management in that county. I was interfacing with the board of elected officials. Like, I was one of the youngest people doing that in that county environment. And so it was like this opening of access that I had never experienced before. And if I failed, I felt like I was failing every other brown or Black person and woman and young person in particular, because I was working with people who were 15 to 20, 30 years my senior, right? And so I think the biggest thing that helped me was, again, I keep coming back to relationships, but I took a really intentional process of getting to know people. And I didn't come in thinking I knew everything, because I really didn't. So I use that to my advantage. Like, I'm new and I want to learn from you. What have you done? What do you know about this issue? Tell me, because I'm not going to front and act like I know things about this. I don't. And I think there's power in admitting that, and in acknowledging that, like, I am here to grow, and I want to grow with you, and I want to learn from you, and I want to do this together. And so I think people had respect for that piece too. And then I really leaned on my mentors. I think I'm not a person that gossips, and I'm about my work, I'm about my business. And I think that's helped me in my career. And so that's what I did. But I knew the people I had in my corner that I trusted to go to when I needed to let my hair down and I needed to talk and vent and just be me, you know?
Well, and there had to have been a ton of challenges that you faced during this. And again, I'm thinking like you were trying to do so much, and then you also had the Super Bowl. How did you like address challenges, and how did you work to solve things? Did you have a system or a strategy?
During that time, it really was reacting to things in some ways, right? It wasn't, because it was such a new territory. The program itself was so new. My predecessor, was there only for a year before me. So I was really building it, yeah, from scratch, essentially. So as things came up, I couldn't systematize a method per se of how I was going to handle things. I think the biggest thing though was me taking care of me and making sure that I had good boundaries, I had good supports, so that when things were coming up, because they definitely did, or irritations were happening, or microaggressions were happening, right? That I had those systems in place for myself as Amanda, so that I could lean on those and I could still show up as my best version in those moments of work. So that's what really helped me, is making sure that I was taking care of me, my home, my body, my mind, right? My spirit, so that I could then show up and address the challenges when they came up.
Learning to create systems for ourselves is essential, from finding systems for work-life balance and emotional well-being to studying and networking. Finding a system can transform your whole life. And Amanda has a few tricks on this. Earlier, she mentioned setting boundaries for time, practicing mindfulness, and this.
And I think now the pandemic has been incredibly tough. And even during this time, there's so much I've been grateful for and recognizing how lucky I am during this time. So for me, a huge part of my practice is gratitude and, really creating, not just saying like, oh, gratitude is important, but actually like practicing it. So there will be things that I do at night to practice gratitude. And there are things I do that I journal about. And I think that helps me put things into perspective about what's important and what's not, which then allows me to prioritize my time and set boundaries. And I think as I'm getting to know myself better, I know where my energy is at. And if there is a thing or a person or whatever it is that's draining my energy, I'm just at a point where it's like, no, that is not worth it. Like, nah, you can stay over there. I don't want to kick it today. Like, I'm not gonna do that to me. And so boundaries for me too are really being so intentional about who I'm choosing to spend time with, what I'm choosing to listen to allow in my space, what things I'm saying yes to and no to. And then another thing too, setting like internal boundaries for myself that, I really love sweets. So I have to set like strong boundaries on that for my health. Right? Like, just being real.
Yeah, I say the same thing. And then by like 10 o'clock, I'm like, give me a cookie.
Me too.
It's been a long day. Give me a cookie.
I know. I have some like amazing ones too in my house right now. So I'm like trying so hard, but yeah. So that, and implementing some routines have helped me kind of stay on some good boundaries and really hold to those as well.
Boundaries. As someone who is building communities, Amanda is always dealing with everyone's boundaries and talking with people on the other side. Yet she manages to get them to understand her perspective, even on sensitive issues. How?
It's not about what you want. So it's not about what I want. It's not about what I want them to do, or I need somebody to do this or this and this and this. It's about me understanding what does that person want and where are our commonalities. So I think about when like the no wrong door work, prime example of this. So we ended up trying to secure money for multiple different things, to add more social workers, to add more a prosecutor, to add resources for investigations. And when we were doing that work and lobbying essentially the county board, it really was being tactical. So finding people, I highly recommend like find people who are going to be in your corner. So find those people. And it's almost like having your planters in the audience of people that are going to support you, who are going to, be strategic with you, ask the questions you need to be asked in that public moment or whatever it is, right? But those people that got your back and they understand and they believe in that vision, right? That you have or that you created with the other folks. And then really I had to understand what is the agenda of everybody else? What do they care about? And what is the connection point for both of us? So if I'm trying to create, more resources and this person's trying to create, trying to make sure that more young people are not entering the system, perfect. There's an alignment. If we can provide resources that prevent young people from coming into the system, we have a connection point right there. So let's build on that. So it's been a lot of that, is really listening to other people and understanding what are they caring about and passionate about, and how do we find those commonalities and bridging that gap.
And if you could go back and tell yourself anything at 15, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say again, believe in yourself and like trust that you are already great and you are capable of anything and you're worthy.
And if a young woman wanted to pursue your path, what advice would you give them?
Oh gosh. I would say it's such a simple question, but so hard because there's so many things I would say. I would say know why, know what your guiding star is, know why you're doing this work. Because again, on those really tough days when other people are doubting you, the work itself is hurting your spirit, and you are just feeling tired, you got to know what that thing is. It's keeping you grounded and keeping you going. And that's what you got to hold on to.
And that is it, the unfiltered, undeterred journey of Amanda Koonjbeharry, a passionate trailblazer leading community-based public policy. And now it's time for the Mind the Ceiling Mindful Minute with Anika Uden, our podcast's associate producer and potentially your company's next CEO. Anika, take it away.
So the first question is, what book changed your life or impacted you the most?
One book that I read not that long ago that I absolutely loved was Untamed by Glennon Doyle. She is just super raw, so authentic, and listening to her journey and her story it just really resonated with me.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Who is your most influential role model?
I would say my grandmother, who she passed a few years ago. She is just such I think the kindest person I've ever known. And she just inspires me so much. I would say both of my grandmothers actually, their strength and resilience. I think when I'm having days where I'm feeling down or I don't feel like, I'm enough or I can keep going, they really do come to mind for me, just thinking about everything that they have been through and fought for, and just how, again, beautiful and kind their spirits were.
Of course. What organizational tool can you not live without?
I have been using this tool. It's pretty simple, and it's something that I think I took it from another training that I went to and have been modifying it to make it my own. We use it now at my organization, but it is a facilitation guide. So we are often facilitating conversations, and we've created this just really helpful template of walking through everything. And as simple as it sounds, it makes our lives so much easier.
What do you do to find calm or chill out?
I have been doing a lot of yoga lately, and that helps. Also dance. I love dancing, and that actually just gets me totally in the chill zone.
That's lovely. If you could have a superpower, what would it be and why?
I would say the ability to fly, because I like to travel. And so if I was able to fly, I would save a ton of money on airline tickets and be able to go wherever I want to go.
I love that. And to wrap this up, what is the next ceiling you want to break?
Oh, there are so many ceilings I want to break, but I would say there are a couple of different projects that I'm thinking about. One is possibly starting my own podcast. And so that is something that I have been ideating on. I think there's some kind of fear that I have in certain ways around it. So I definitely want to break that ceiling and just do it.
Go for it.
And thank you.
And you survived the mindful minute. So if you do that, you can start a podcast.
And that is our show, Mind the Ceiling. And here we don't mind the ceiling because it's meant to be shattered. We are here for you. So please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to us. Follow us on social media and share with your friends. And we'd love to hear from you. Hit us up on our social media pages. You can ask our guests questions, or we'll just celebrate your successes. We'll cheer you on your journey. And with that, what makes us excited about the future?
You know, I've been thinking a lot about kiddos recently, which sounds kind of weird, but I mean, a lot of the work we're doing affects young kids, right? But just seeing their level of resiliency in this pandemic, they have been the group that's been shuffled around so much, right? Schools closing, schools opening, they can't get vaccines, whatever it is, right? Like there's so much that's been placed on kids and young people right now. And for me, seeing their resilience and seeing some of the trailblazers and ceiling breakers that I know that are much younger than me, like that gives me so much hope and joy, just to see people owning who they are and not being so unapologetically authentic. Like it's just powerful.